Now, any questions as far as Genesis 2 and the creation of marriage are concerned? Just one, if not, one final thing. One of the very common modern charges against the Old Testament and against the church is that the church is guilty of misogyny and patriarchalism. And if any of you read feminist theory, you know that patriarchy is the root of all evils, according to it. Now, if you look at Genesis 2 very closely, it doesn't either advocate patriarchy or its opposite, matriarchy. Theologically, it is countercultural. It gives a view of marriage which is countercultural to all given cultures. And you can see it most clearly in this God's determination that a woman should be the counterpart of her husband, the helper of her husband, but also in the way marriage works. The husband leaves father and mother, cleaves to wife, the two become one flesh. Now that is as countercultural in modern society as it was in any African society or any society in the ancient world. It doesn't enshrine male privilege or male power. If anything, it teaches male responsibility and the importance of sacrifice. Now, I want to look at the theology that you'll see mapped out in Genesis chapter 3 through to Genesis chapter 11, the so-called primeval history, primeval theology. Now, there's something very wonderful here. On the one hand, you get the picture of growing disorder in creation. Remember, my emphasis is that Genesis 1 shows us how God created an ordered cosmos. Now you get the disordering of God's ordered cosmos. Now, I would have expected God to deprive human beings of his blessing if they rebelled against him and rebelled against the order that he had provided in creation. Now, the paradox is that on the one hand, God is not soft on evil and sin. He deals with it, but in such a way that the blessing continues and he brings good out of evil, despite human sin. Now, what we have here is a picture of a world that becomes disordered and the way God deals with disorder. And there are three dimensions to the disorder that comes into the world, and I'll explain it in due course. First of all, the first dimension is the theological dimension, the fall, Adam and Eve rebelling against God. The second dimension is the family and the social dimension. Within the family itself, human beings don't care for each other, but brother kills brother. And that then leads to social anarchy. Human beings killing human beings. The third dimension of this order is a supernatural dimension. A boundary is crossed. So this boundary is crossed, this boundary is crossed, and you get the crossing of angels and human beings sexually. Disorder there. A spiritual disorder. And then finally, you get a disordered relationship between human beings and animals. Human beings violate animals, animals violate human beings. Violence getting out of hand. Now, the pattern that we find mapped out in Genesis 9 to 11 is the following one. You get, first of all, God's gift, his benefaction, then you get human sin, then you get God's judgment on human sin, and then what God does to mitigate the effects of his judgment, and then finally God's punishment for the sin But the punishment for sin is still at the same time preserving sinners. Because see, God goes the opposite way to the way I'd go. If I were God, if human beings upset me and defied me, I would zap them. I would kill the sinner. God's plan is to kill the sin, not the sinner, if I can put it that way. Lucky for you that I'm not God. Otherwise, there'd be no hope for you.
This does make me nervous considering we've got an assignment due in 2 days.
That's right, yes. But I'm not God, so you needn't be worried. There are 4 cycles, and you see this going over 4 cycles. First of all, it starts with the fall, and you know the story. You get God giving marriage. No sooner than God had given the gift of marriage, then right in marriage between husband and wife, they both together defy God. They mistrust God. They want to be gods, not just like God. In the image of God, they want to be their own gods. They disobey God, and trouble starts. And trouble starts most obviously within marriage itself, whereas previously they were naked and not ashamed. Shame comes in and affects their relationship with each other. Very profound observation. So you get God's gift of marriage, you get the sin, which is disobedience. God's reaction to sin, God's judgment, is rather strange. I would have expected God to curse Adam and Eve. But he doesn't curse Adam and Eve, he curses the snake and the soil from which human beings are taken. Then God gives a wonderful act of preservation. He provides proper clothes for human beings so that social intercourse is possible, so human beings aren't naked to each other, exposed to each other, and exposed in a way that makes relationships impossible. God provides permanent clothes, but notice at the cost of the death of animals. He kills animals to provide clothes for human beings. And then God's judgment is a merciful judgment. God's judges always in order to save life. God expels Adam and Eve from the garden so that they don't do what? Eat from the tree of life, which meant if they ate from the tree of life, then sin would be eternal. There'd be no hope. It would turn this world into hell if we had remained in the garden as sinners eating the tree of life. So mercifully, you get the expulsion from the garden. Then you get the second cycle of sin, which is the Cain killing his brother Abel. You know the story, but that's preceded by the fact that Adam and Eve, who are fallen creatures, still enjoy God's blessing. They procreate. They have sons. They have children. But the 2 sons fall out with each other. Cain kills his brother Abel and buries him in the ground. God doesn't just zap him dead, but he confronts him with his murder. Very telling question. Where is your brother Abel? And he uses the wonderful phrase, am I my brother's keeper? Now that's the story of the human race. Am I my brother's keeper? And the answer that she should be given is, yes, I am my brother's keeper. That's what I've been made to be. But then God does something strange to the murderer. Strictly speaking, if Cain killed Abel, what should God do to Cain? Justice, kill him. But God does something very strange. God puts his mark on Cain. According to Jewish tradition, it's the letter Tau, the last letter of the alphabet, which is also in ancient Hebrew before the modern script is that. God puts his mark on Cain. Now what's the effect of that mark? It means that Cain, the murderer, is under God's protection. Anyone who touches the murderer has to reckon with God and God's judgment. Very strange. God protects a murderer and prevents vengeance in this way from being unleashed and getting out of hand.
It's also a sign of his judgment, though.
It's a sign of his judgment, both of those. It's ambiguous, like the sign of the cross. By the way, Jesus is our brother. All of us are Cain's. We killed our brother Jesus, but what does God do? Puts a sign on us, gives us life instead of death for our murder. But there's the judgment of God. Since the blood of Cain came onto the ground, Cain is no longer at home in the ground, can't be a farmer, and so he becomes a homeless, restless, uprooted person, and he then, paradoxically, is the founder of city and city culture. Becomes a metal worker, and then you get the music and metalwork, the two fundamental parts of human civilization and city culture. The beginnings of human culture. Blessing despite sin. It's not possible to live off the land, so a new way of livelihood is opened up for Cain and the descendants of Cain. Then comes the most far-reaching problem of all, the story of the flood. And we had the tail end of that in the reading last Sunday. Remember the rainbow, the flood. Now, what is it that unleashes the flood? We need to look closely at Genesis chapter 6, 1 following. Michael, can you start reading verses 1 through to verse 4, first of all, of chapter 6 of Genesis?
When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years.
Go on, verse 4 too.
The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown.
Just a couple of words there. First of all, sons of God is a normal expression in the Old Testament for angels. So the sons of God are the angels. But here the focus is not on the good angels, but the fallen angels. It's a very cryptic, euphemistic kind of story. There's something terrible that goes on here that's covered by the veil of discretion. So the sons of God, angels, they take the daughters of men, not take them in marriage, but rape them. And they go into them. Go in is the normal term for having sexual intercourse. And they father children from them. So you have a crossing of a very important boundary. Now, the first boundary is the boundary between God and man. The second boundary is human being and human being, the boundary of life, the respect for life. Now, the third boundary here is a sexual boundary, and the boundary between human beings and angels is violated. And what you get then is giants or monsters coming out of this sexual union. That's the first problem, crossing this boundary. Any questions? Yes?
So angels do not have bodies, like how? Yeah, okay. Don't worry.
Okay, but there is something. You have a sexual intercourse which is not just physical. If you want to get an inkling of this, and I'm a bit reluctant to recommend it because it's such a ghastly film, go to the video shop and buy a very famous old film which is called Rosemary's Baby, or get hold of the book Rosemary's Baby, which in movie form touches on this phenomenon. Okay, there is a sexual Now, look, the less said about the better. It'll only arouse your curiosity, and that's bad. First problem. Now, the result of that is that God takes his spirit from human beings and sets an upper limit to human life. Notice 120 years, that's a max. Instead of human beings, one of the reasons why human beings might want to have intercourse with angels is to get supernatural power to have eternal life. But the opposite happens, that human life is diminished, not enhanced, by this crossing of this boundary. Let's go on. Murray, can you go on reading from verse 5 following?
The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain.
Notice the pain of God here, the suffering of God. Keep going.
So the Lord said, I will wipe mankind whom I have created from the face of the earth, men and animals and creatures that move along the ground, and birds of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them. But Noah found favour in the eyes of the Lord.
So God grieves that he made human beings, because human beings don't just commit occasional sin, but they are riddled with sin, so that their whole imagination, it's not just their actions are evil, but their whole imagination is corrupted. The corrupted imagination, evil from youth. And so God decides to destroy humanity. He regrets making humanity. Okay, Ben, can you go on? There's something that's added in the following verses.
This is the account of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence.
Just stop there. Now this is the key term here. The earth is full of violence, anarchy, disorder. By the way, that's the name that's given by the Palestinian group in Gaza, is Hamas. Exactly the same root. Violence.
So that comes into Arabic?
That comes into Arabic. It's a common Semitic root. So violence, anarchy, and it's violence at all levels. It's political violence, murder, sexual violence, etc. So the earth is riddled with violence. Disorder comes right down into the human domain. Keep going.
God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways.
Just stop there. All the people on earth should be all flesh on earth had corrupted its ways. Nephesh. Now, unless you see that, the following doesn't make sense, because nephesh is not just human beings, but it includes animal life. So violence is not just between humans and humans, but also humans and animals. Violence. Physical violence, sexual violence, every kind of violence. Would be included in this the whole phenomenon of bestiality, sexual intercourse with animals, but also animals attacking human beings attacking animals. So violence, the earth is corrupted, violence, anarchy is unleashed on God's good order. How God saw how corrupt the earth had become for all flesh. Notice all flesh, human beings and animals, had corrupted its way upon the earth. For the earth is filled with violence because of them. So, violence here. Now, what does God do then? Notice these 3 dimensions. This had happened here. The first murder had occurred in the human family. God alleviates that. But now you have murder, violence, human beings, each other, families versus families, communities versus communities. You have this violence, you have this violence. God's, where am I? So you have the growth of Adam's family, then you get human sin. God's immediate reaction is to limit human lifespan and to destroy life upon the earth. However, there's an exception. He decides to rescue Noah and his family, 8 persons with the ark, and a representative cross-section of all animal life, all nephesh, comes into the ark. God decides to rescue human beings and animals through the ark. And then you remember, after the flood, Noah makes a sacrifice to God. This is the first burnt offering. There'd been offerings to God, but this is the first burnt offering of animals to God as an act of atonement. And God accepts the offering of Noah. And in reaction to the offering of Noah, he makes the first covenant with human beings. His covenant with Noah, which includes all animals as well as the whole of humanity. He blesses and he makes a covenant with humanity. So the flood is not just a destroying flood, but it's a cleansing flood. And you get a new order that's established after the flood. Let's work through it and work out what's different after the flood. Tom, can you start off with chapter 8, verses 20 to 22.
Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took some of every clean animal, and some of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth.
Can you see the paradox? Even though man's intention or imagination is evil, God promises not to curse the ground anymore. What does he do instead?
Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease.
Number one, God ushers a new age in which he deals with evil not by means of punishment, but by means of sacrifice. So this is the foundation then for the sacrifice, which becomes the divine part of the divine service in the Old Testament and ultimately Christ. So sacrifice is there at the foundation of the new order after the flood. Secondly, Elizabeth, can you read chapter 9, verses 1 through to 7 and work out what's new here?
I've got this.
Okay, Tom, okay. Read it, Tom, then.
God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth.
Just stop there. Who had God said to that first of all? Adam. Now, so Noah is a second Adam. Notice this? Noah, second Adam, a new world, a new era, a second Adam. The blessing is now given. Whereas the first blessing was given before the fall, this blessing is given after the fall, after the flood. Now, what's entailed in this? Keep going.
The fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth, and on every bird of the air, on everything that creeps on the ground, and on all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And just as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. For your own lifeblood I will surely require a reckoning. From every animal I will require it, and from human beings, each one for the blood of another, I will require a reckoning for human life. Whoever sheds the blood of a human, by a human shall that person's blood be shed. For in his own image God made humankind. And you, be fruitful and multiply, abound on the earth and multiply in it.
Now, how does God deal with the problem of violence between human beings and animals?
Almost a natural justice.
That's too abstract. What's the natural justice? What does he do? Whereas previously God had given plants to human beings to eat, now he gives
all the animals.
He gives animals, yes, to human beings as food. So they have a vested interest in making sure that animals don't threaten human life by getting out of hand, using them. Notice this, so animals are sacrificed for human life. Human beings eat animals. But then secondly, if an animal kills a human being, what happens? Human beings are allowed to kill that animal who killed the human being. They cannot exterminate the whole species. So because one shark took one person off Manly, doesn't mean you wipe out the whole species of sharks. Limited retribution, that's the justice side. So the provision of animals as food, and the provision of justice. If an animal kills a human being, the permission is for that animal to be killed, but no more. And what does he do about this dimension? Human beings killing each other? An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Actually put, whoever sheds the blood of a man, by man shall his blood be shed. Now that's not an eye, for tooth, because it's a limited eye for eye. But what happens usually in vengeance is, you kill my brother, what do? I kill 2 of your brothers, they kill 4 of my brothers, and so you get the vengeance being unleashed. God gives permission, not a command, God gives permission for limited capital punishment. What's the limitation? 1 for 1, and that's the end of the story. So justice is done, an eye for an eye, and not 2 eyes for 1 eye. Notice?
But also,
and that's all.
In your case, though, it's not necessarily the brother who's killing that guy.
No, that's right.
Man. It's a generic sort of, it's a bit more justice-oriented than a personal vengeance attack.
Well, it's not even that. It says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. I cannot kill, if one person in your family kills a person in my family, the only person that can be killed is the murderer. Nobody else in the family. So you can't kill an innocent person just because they are a relative of the person who is the murderer. You can only kill, at the most, that one person who's committed the murder. You can't wipe out a whole species of animals, but only the animal that caused the death. Now notice that this isn't a command saying this must be done. It's permission that's given. Permission for eating meat, permission for capital punishment, and limited capital punishment. So limited vengeance, very severe limitations. And in this way, the order is maintained. And there's a vested interest in maintaining order. Vengeance does not get out of hand. And lastly then, God makes a covenant with Noah and all the animals that never again will he destroy not only human life but animal life on earth by means of a flood. The ecological order will be maintained. Now that's very important for us in our current fear of an ecological catastrophe, that God promises that he will maintain the conditions for life on earth. The rainbow reminds us of that. Okay, now I want to look at the Tower of Babel, and then we'll begin the work on the call of Noah. Could you look very closely at Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through to 7, because I want to home in on that because it's such an important passage. Abraham. Did I say Noah? Abraham I meant.